Hello and welcome to our running program. I'm your host and moderator, Zachariah Hughes, and tonight we will meet 13 candidates vying for Anchorage Assembly seats. They'll be asked a series of questions and their answers will be timed. There's also an opportunity for each candidate to ask questions of their opponents at some point during the show. Candidates have been briefed on the format of each segment prior to filming, but if you in the audience want to take a look for yourself, you can find those formats on our website, alaskapublic.org. Now let's get started with tonight's show and meet the first set of candidates vying for Assembly Seat A in the Chugiak Eagle River area. Incumbent Amy Demboski, welcome, Ms.
Thank
Demboski.
you.
And Mr. Nicholas Begich III. I'm going to just stick with Mr. Begich if that's okay with you.
That sounds great.
And let's hop right into things. Ms. Demboski, your opening remarks.
Well, thank you. And first I want to say it truly has been an honor to serve the people of Chugiak Eagle River for the past 3 years. It's the community I grew up in, and my husband and I have raised our kids in. And I've decided to run for re-election because I think it's essential. With the balance of power on the Assembly has shifted to a liberal nature, and the mayor is also of that persuasion. I think it's important to have a strong, proven, reliable Republican conservative voice for Chugiak Eagle River, and someone who frankly knows our community. So I'm excited to get back to work for the people of Chugiak and Eagle River, and I hope throughout tonight's debate we have an opportunity to talk about the issues.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Demboski. And Mr. Begich, your opening remarks.
Well, my name is Nicholas Begich. I was born in Alaska but raised outside by my maternal grandparents, and it's a big part of the reason why I'm a conservative Republican. I know a lot of people find that difficult to believe, but it's true. I was a member of Young Republicans High School. I was a Republican from the first time I registered to vote all the way to now. I've donated to campaigns of Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, Steve Forbes, George W. Bush, Natasha von Imhoff, and others. And I'm excited about the opportunity to run. I consider it a privilege, and I hope that you get an opportunity to really get a flavor and a texture for my priorities and issues and the things that I'm passionate about.
Okay, thank you both. We're going to jump right into questions. The first one is for you, Ms. Demboski. I'm going to go ahead and assume that state aid may continue to drop in the years ahead, and I'm curious how you see the Assembly closing the city's budget gap in the next 3 years.
Well, let me be very clear. We don't have a revenue problem at the City of Anchorage at this point. The fact of the matter is, over the last budget session, we showed millions of dollars of savings that we could have made for taxpayers. Unfortunately, this Assembly and this administration chose to ignore that. But I think through shared services, through better delivery of services, through privatization of some services, there's no question we can live within our means. The question is, are you going to elect people to make that happen? And I've demonstrated throughout my tenure on the Assembly, I've put forward amendments and I've actually had legislation passed to save taxpayers millions. And I plan on doing the same in the next 3 years.
Okay, and Mr. Begich, the same question to you on how you'd address a budget gap at the Assembly level.
Well, I agree with most of what Amy just said. Ultimately, we're dealing with a situation that's sort of a slow motion train wreck. The problems of the city have not yet materialized, but everyone here is aware that we're going to have those problems. And I think that, as we move forward, it's critical that we have decision makers that are able to parse through that difficult situation and really find that demarcation point between tight, manageable city budgets and the critical services that we rely on government to provide.
Okay, and you mentioned critical services. I'm curious what your funding priorities are. What are the essential government functions that you'd fight for if you were elected?
Well, I think the critical functions of government are education, public safety, and providing a fundamental environment for businesses to succeed. I think we out in our district in Chugiak Eagle River, we've seen a very surprising trend on the crime side, and it's something that constituents have been telling me about since I jumped in the race. We've seen murders over the last few years. This is very unusual for our district, and I'd like to see a restoration of the criminal gang unit and the illicit drug units at the police force, because those are critical components for ensuring that we can identify and put these people away as quickly as possible.
Okay, and I want to circle back to public safety later on, but before we do that, Ms. Demboski, for you, what are your funding priorities on the Assembly in another term?
Sure, no question. Public safety, infrastructure, and education. But we can't do those basic critical components unless we have a strong fiscal foundation. And everything's intertwined here. And this is why I say it's so important to have somebody with experience. The reason we're starting to see such an uptick in crime in Eagle River is because the Anchorage Assembly allowed high-density housing right in downtown Eagle River. Just not even 2 weeks ago, we had a shooting right downtown in Eagle River. So it goes back to when you elect people to do land use and zoning codes, those are going to have impacts not only on your crime rates, but they're going to have impacts on your traffic problems. You're going to have impacts on essentially all kinds of public safety strains. So that's why it's critical to elect somebody with experience.
Okay, and bringing it back to resources, assuming that less state money continues to flow in for education, how should the city change its approach to funding schools?
Well, let me be very clear. I think that fundamentally we know some of the largest cost drivers on the state is K-12 education, it's the PERS-TERS liability, and it's Medicaid. Two of the three are formula funded. Fundamentally, the state has to deal with formula funding. Otherwise, we can't sustain it. There's just no way. Those three things will take up 100% of the budget. But on a city level, I agree with Mr. Evans. We have to revolutionize education. We have to do things differently. Doing things the same way over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of an insanity. But when you get in a bureaucratic model like the Anchorage School District, essentially what we're striving for is mediocrity, and that's not acceptable.
Okay, I do just want to follow that up and say, but at an assembly level, what discretion does that allow? I mean, there's not a line item or veto.
Well, let me be very clear. The power of a vote is a powerful one, and what we've seen on this assembly in the last couple of cycles, you have members now who have the courage to vote no on a budget. So you have to have members who have the courage to lower a budget and force change, because the school district will not change unless we force them to do so. And quite frankly, I think that's our responsibility. We're elected to be the voice of the people, and if people aren't willing to do that, they shouldn't be on the assembly.
Okay, and Mr. Begich, the same question to you on how you see funding for education going forward with less money coming from the state side.
So if I have a bias with respect to funding for education, it's to teachers. You know, I went to a school that had very few facilities at the time that I was there, but what we had were teachers that really cared about the learning outcomes of the students, and as a result, we had some fantastic education at the school that I went to. Ultimately, I think that the way that we lower the tax burden associated with education is we've got to look at the way that we're bonding things. I think that the school bond issuances, we've got some really incredible facilities in this town, but the question is that really necessary in order to educate our children in the best possible way? I think teachers are the critical component here, and that infrastructure and facilities sort of come second to that.
Well, in the interest of fairness, I do want to ask you a follow-up question on that. Will you be supporting the school bond that's going before voters on April 5th?
You know, I will be supporting it because it's a conservative bond in this particular case. It's a bond that supports maintenance activities in the schools, and as a conservative, I believe in maintaining your current investments, so that you don't have to make subsequent larger investments in the future. However, what I would have liked to have seen as a part of this bond package is a migration of things like the IP cameras, things like the school buses. These are small, relatively small expenditures that really should be rolled into a long-term budgetary plan as opposed to being moved outside of the school district budget and into a bond package.
Okay, and just circling back a little bit, what does the term public safety mean to you, and how would you use an assembly position to advance that?
Well, public safety really is about making sure that the public's safe, right? It's about making sure that we live in a community that we're not afraid to go outside. We're not afraid to walk the streets of downtown or walk the streets of downtown Eagle River, right? And I think there are a number of people in our community, and there are certainly parts of our community as a whole in Anchorage, where people don't feel safe, right? They don't feel safe, and they don't feel safe because there's a high level of crime, there's public inebriation, there are a number of problems that, quite honestly, the current police force is not equipped to deal with their current staffing levels. And that's something that needs to be addressed. It's something that is a priority for me, and I think it's something that the Assembly has the ability to influence.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Demboski, the same question on what public safety means and how you'd continue to work towards it.
Well, I'm first going to address one major component to the school district bond. Politically speaking, what we saw the school district do is basically strip Gruning Middle School and essentially a major infrastructure project in our community that needs to be fixed. They completely took it out of the bond. So for that reason, it's one of the most important issues in our community is Gruning Middle School needs a new roof. And they took it out. It was a political move, and I think it was unfortunate. Public safety to me is very simple. It's emergency services. It's police, it's fire. It's those emergency services we need to take care of. I'm proud of my record. You know, I implemented a situation where we could hire 9 new paramedics, offset the overtime costs at virtually no additional cost. And I'm proud of that record. And those are the types of things that our assembly members need to do. They need to dig deeper, and they need to actually pass legislation that makes a difference.
Okay, and on digging deeper, I want to ask about cannabis, commercial cannabis, and how you would like to see the commercial cannabis sector in your district advance and develop in the next 1 to 3 years, let's say?
Well, let me be very clear. It's not about what I want. It's about our community wants. I'm proud of the fact that I helped write some of that legislation, and it absolutely, every single point I brought forward from our community, I met with all the community councils and had public meetings. All of those desires for controls or protections for the community, they were all adopted, every single one of them. So I think people in Chugach-Eagle River, they're cautious. They want to make sure it's done responsibly. They want to make sure that the community is engaged. And if there's a problem with an operator, they want to make sure there's an ability for recourse. Those are the things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for to make sure it's fair. You know, we want to make sure people getting into the industry know what to expect, but they also have to know what the community expects of them. And so I hope to facilitate those communications.
Okay, thank you. And it's the same question to you, Mr. Begich, on how you'd like to see commercial cannabis look in the Eagle River Chugach area.
Well, you know, ultimately, and I want to be clear for the voters, you know, I voted no on that initiative. And the reason that I voted no is because ultimately I've got a 4-year-old son, and I believe that the tacit commercialization of marijuana in our communities lowers the barrier to entry for individuals, particularly young adults. However, as a legislator, I think it's my responsibility to carry out the will of the people. And you know, the voters have voted, you know, and they've said that they want to permit this. And as a result, you know, I will do my best to write legislation that is responsible, that addresses the community's concerns, and that also provides an environment in which entrepreneurs who are trying to get into this space will have the opportunity to succeed.
Okay, thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to you now. And so starting with you, Ms. Domboski, you'll have the opportunity to ask a question. Again, if you can keep it to 20 seconds, I'll be very grateful. Mr. Begich, you'll have 45 seconds to respond and then a 45-second rebuttal, ma'am.
Sure, I'd love to. So as we look at running for office and representing our community, I like to see what community involvement somebody's had and what connection you have to our community. So can you talk a little bit about, prior to running for office, what engagement you've had with the Chugach-Eagle River community?
I think that's an excellent question, you know, and I think that I think a lot of voters, you know, they look at the idea of a career politician and it's a turnoff. You know, they're looking for people who come in with solid experience. They're looking for people who come in with a different and fresh perspective. And have I been at all of the meetings? No, I haven't. And I commend you because you are a consistent presence in those discussions, and I've committed to doing the same if elected. But ultimately, I come from a different perspective. I've never worked for government. Neither has anyone in my household. I come from purely a private sector perspective, and I hope to bring, you know, some of that perspective to the Assembly.
Okay, and your rebuttal, Ms. Domboski.
Sure, I appreciate that. I think it's great when anybody stands up to serve. But I think it's very clear, you know, before I ran for Assembly, I was a community council president. I was chair of the Municipal Budget Advisory Commission. I was Mayor Sullivan's appointment to the Parks and Rec Board of Supervisors in Chugach-Eagle River. I've been a lion in that community probably for more than 15 years. And I think it's important before you step forward and say, I'm going to lead you, you actually have to represent people, which means you have to engage with them and really understand the community. So I hope after this race is over, I hope you engage. I hope you come and learn more about the community. And I think you'll find it, you're going to love raising your son here.
Okay, and Mr. Begich, it's your opportunity to ask a question of your opponent.
So 61% of Anchorage, which is a conservative city by any measure, voted for one of the most left-leaning politicians in the state. Do you believe that this is a referendum on your ability to carry the conservative perspective to Anchorage voters?
No, I don't. You're one of the 61%. I know you voted for Ethan Berkowitz. And you know, you have to look at it from my perspective. There was no conservative voice in the race. Chugach Eagle River, a lot of residents actually encouraged me to run. And as I made that decision to run, I thought it was important, but I was also running against a 20-year politician who had hundreds of thousands of dollars in his war chest. So I think for an assembly member who served for a year and a half, when I made the decision to run, I made it to the runoff, and I beat a lot of other millionaires and career politicians to get there. So I think the discussion points were valid, and I think the Anchorage voters chose, and so did the Chugach Eagle River voters, and they'll have the opportunity the April 5th again. But I look forward to having a strong conservative message. I've had one consistently, and I've been effective delivering it and getting things done for Chugach Eagle River.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Begich, your rebuttal.
Well, you know, I appreciate that, and I think it takes a lot of courage to stand forth and run for any office, and I commend you and anyone else who's willing to do that. You know, ultimately, we live in a conservative community, and you know, you're right. I did vote for Ethan Berkowitz, and it was a challenging decision to make. I voted for two Democrats in my life, my uncle and Ethan Berkowitz, and you know, ultimately. You know, I really believe that that to have an effective conservative voice, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you know, the city is with you. And unfortunately, in that election, the city was not with a conservative on that one.
Okay, Ms. Demboski, it's your opportunity for another question of your opponent.
Sure. Well, as we were talking about community engagement in the first question, my second question is, can you expand and let me know and voters know what labor unions are supporting you or have endorsed you or given you money?
It's a great question. You know, so I have been supported by the AEA and endorsed by the AEA, which is a teachers union. I have received support from the police union, and I have received support from the Teamsters union. And you know, I've told every union that I've spoken with, you know, I will not agree with you on a lot of things, but what I will promise you is I will return your phone calls. If you have a data-driven message, I will allow you to bring that message to me. And they appreciated that perspective, and that's why they're supporting me. You know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, I've taken $3,000 from unions. None of the members of my household are members of a union, and certainly that's not going to influence any of the outcomes should I be elected to this position.
Okay, thank you for that response. And Ms. Demboski, your rebuttal.
I appreciate that. You know, I have a fundamental issue with elected local officials who take money from bargaining units, political, public bargaining units, that they're supposed to be unbiased and rule on their contracts. I think it's a fundamental conflict of interest, and I think, frankly, it puts you on both sides of the table. And I think we always have to remember, who is it we serve? We serve the people of Chugach Eagle River. It's not about the employees. We have wonderful employees. My husband is an employee. We have wonderful employees. But it is about representing our community and putting the taxpayers and the residents before any public safety unit, any public employee unit. And that's why I said, when you actually vote on their contract, I just think it's inappropriate to take their money. Okay,
and the last question is yours, Mr. Begich.
Well, as follow on to that question, you know, and I appreciate that perspective. You know, let's talk about who's been supporting you in your campaign. Mm-hmm. Home builders have been supporting you financially during your campaign, and at the same time, you've been aggressively attempting to bypass public commenting process for Title 21 amendments. Why should voters trust you are also impartial in your role as a land use committee chair?
Well, that's a great soundbite, but I've never received a PAC check from the Home Builders Association that I can remember, definitely not in this race. And let me be very clear, I've never bypassed public process, ever. That's a lie. I mean, it's simply not true. In fact, I introduced an ordinance. It had 2 weeks before it had public hearing. It went to committee where the public was invited to testify and come and talk and sit at the table. So were home builders, so were members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So this mantra that is out there, it's just disingenuous, and it just goes to the fact that I think it's a learning process for you, and I think it's an opportunity for you to actually read the code and understand how it works. But the fact of the matter is, there are real problems in our community with the building codes, and it's going to drive up the cost of construction, and there's bureaucrats that are wanting to, for political reasons, stop any way to fix it. And I think that's just wrong to politicize that process, especially when it's going to impact homeowners.
Into that 45-second limit. That's okay. And the rebuttal from you, Mr. Begich.
Well, I appreciate that you're close to the process. You've had 6 years of involvement through community council and then also on assembly. But I just want to make it clear, you raise the issue of unions and tacitly sort of imply, that I'm going to be influenced by that. Yet you yourself have taken money from home builders, and you're on the land use committee. So if you can be impartial, I can be impartial.
Okay, we are back to the part of the show where I get to ask the questions, and I want to ask some that are specific to the district that you both represent or are seeking to represent. Starting with you, Ms. Demboski, how important is it to have consistent regulations across the municipality for you compared to code that's specific to the communities in North Anchorage?
So probably what you're talking about is land use codes, Title 21. And I think it's essential. Within Title 21, we have Chapter 10, which is specific for Chugiak Eagle River. Girdwood has Chapter 9. I think it's essential that our community has its own voice. We're a rural community. We don't want to look like downtown Anchorage, nor would you ask Girdwood to look like downtown Anchorage. So I think it's crucial to have our own chapter within Title 21, and I'm proud of the work I've done on that. It creates local control and local autonomy in our ability to mandate and to help develop and guide development through our community as the years go by. And I absolutely think it's crucial to have individuality.
Okay, and Mr. Begich, that's the same question to you on uniqueness in the code for Chugiak and Eagle River.
Well, ultimately, we are one community, and the texture of that community may be different depending on where you're at. And Ms. Demboski brings up a great point. Downtown Anchorage is not the same as downtown Eagle River, and it's not the same as downtown Girdwood, if even such a place exists. So, ultimately, I think that we have to use some judiciousness in terms of which regulations should apply citywide and which should really be complementary to the texture of the community.
Okay. How do you evaluate the job that this mayor has done so far since taking office?
Well, it's a little early to say, but what I respect is that he has kept the rhetoric to a minimum. He's looking to govern for the entire city, and I think that's really important. I think it's important that when you're elected that you're governing for all of the people that are in your district, and not just those that voted for you. And so, I'm pleased to see that. We're going to have to watch and see, if that continues. But ultimately, it's a collaborative process. It's a process that involves the assembly. It's a process that involves the mayor. It's a process that involves the municipal employees. And we all have to work together in order to achieve our shared objective to make Anchorage a great place to live, work, and play.
Okay. Ms. Demboski, your assessment of the administration?
Well, frankly, I think it's been a disaster for taxpayers. And people will notice 2 weeks after the election, you'll get your green card in the mail. Essentially, they busted the tax cap. This administration, in the first 6 months in office, has raised property taxes just from the operating budget alone, $11.4 million. That's a 4.3% increase, and that's only from the operating budget, and that's directly to property taxpayers. Frankly, in our community, people are concerned about taxes, they're concerned about private property rights, a lot of issues, but every single piece of legislation this administration is pushing is counter to what the residents of our community are asking for. And I think that's concerning. And I think it's concerning that my opponent thinks he's been doing great. I just don't see it the same way.
I'm not sure I said that, but...
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we get too into it, I want to ask a question about a totally controversial topic, SAP. And I'm curious, what is your solution to the SAP software implementation project?
Well, at this point, they've voted and they've moved forward. They funded it. They've moved forward. I think it was a mistake. I think ultimately you have a $9 million project. By the time it's done, it's going to be $79 million. A long time ago, when Mayor Sullivan was in office, I'm the one who pushed for an independent audit of SAP because I realized a year in that it was a problem. And remember, it was initially implemented before I was on the assembly. So ultimately, what's done is done. I mean, they have passed to move on. They've voted to fund it. But now at this point, it's holding the implementers accountable, keeping them to their timeline and keeping them under budget. So it will be an oversight role for the assembly.
Okay. And Mr. Begich, for you, SAP, how to fix it going forward?
Well, I was a member. I was a member of a team at Ford Motor Company before moving back to Alaska that was implementing a $300 million implementation of Oracle, very similar to SAP. And my view is that the project needs to be once again stopped. And I think that we're at a time right now where we need to be really buttoning down the hatches, and we're not doing that by allowing this project to move forward. We were sold on the idea as a community that we could not exist on PeopleSoft. That was 5 years ago. We're still on PeopleSoft. I don't think most people realize not a single module of SAP is actually being used in production right now. And we're headed to 70 million. I wouldn't be surprised to see this project balloon to $150 million before it's over.
Before we get there, I have one more question before I turn it over to the both of you for closing remarks. And we'll start with you, Mr. Begich. Do you believe that building in the municipality is too tightly or too loosely regulated right now? And what are your solutions for development area-wide?
Well, one of the things that I'm really concerned about in Anchorage is the affordability of living here. We have people who, they want to stay, right? But when they can't afford food, when they can't afford housing, when they can't afford the basic necessities necessary to really have a great living here in Anchorage, they're forced to think about going somewhere else. And the housing code is a part of that. There are regulations in Title 21. And Title 21 is an 834-page document. Okay, this is a very long document. It's very complex for builders to follow, and I think we need to do some things within that document specifically to address the cost of housing here in Anchorage. Because if we're not able to bring everyone with us, we're not going to have a great place to live.
Okay, and Ms. Dembosky, an issue I know you know very well, but too tightly regulated, too loosely regulated, your stance?
Well, it's a bureaucratic mess at some points, to be honest with you. And I want to go back and be very clear on the SAP issue. I have not been voting to fund it. I've been one of the only people that's been voting against that project because I think it is a mess, frankly. There's no other way to put it. But with Title 21, frankly, there are regulations that don't make sense. For example, the changes that I'm trying to make right now, there's a lot of unintended consequences. For example, Eagle River Valley, if you have more than a 20% grade, you're not going to be able to build anything other than a ranch-style house, potentially with a flat roof. And that was one of those unintended consequences in Title 21 that I'm trying to correct. And I've had a lot of support in that endeavor.
Okay, and we've run out of time, so I'm going to ask you to each offer up your closing remarks, starting with you, Ms. Dembosky.
Well, I appreciate you all tuning in tonight and giving me the opportunity to serve you on the Assembly for the last 3 years. My husband, Ben, and I, we love Chugiak Eagle River, and I think I've been a strong, effective voice for you on the Anchorage Assembly. I look forward to the next 3 years. No matter what, I will always be there. I will always be responsive, and I will always serve you on the Anchorage Assembly. Chugiak Eagle River is a great place to live, but our voice needs to be heard, and we need a strong voice on that body.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And sir, your closing remarks.
So when money was flowing and things were good, we could afford a contentious tone on the Assembly. But right now is a time where we don't have time for that. We've got to work together. I'm a longtime conservative. I'm a longtime Republican. I am the kind of person that knows how to work together because I grew up in a family from all political ideologies. And I'm prepared to lead, I'm prepared to listen, and I'm prepared to represent the Chugiak Eagle River community going forward. Thank you for your consideration and for your vote.
Wonderful, and thank you both for agreeing to be here. That is all the time we have for this section. We heard from the two candidates vying for Assembly Seat A in the Chugiak Eagle River District, Nicholas Begich III and incumbent Amy Dembosky. Thank you both again for taking part in our show, and thank you in the audience for joining us. Up next will be the Assembly Seat D in West Anchorage, so please stay with us.